faithfully conveying value by interpreting great books from around the world. Hi, this is Sally with the Book Talk. Today, we're interpreting the book called Darwin and Evolution for you. In 1859, Darwin published On the Origin of Species, marking the birth of evolution theory. Darwin's theory of evolution is another major scientific achievement in modern science, after Copernicus's heliocentric theory. Moreover, evolution theory's influence extends beyond biology to other fields, impacting human societal development. The author of this book, Jonathan Howard, is a professor at the Institute of Genetics, University of Cologne, and a Royal Society Fellow. In his book, Darwin and Evolution, drawing from rich historical sources, he introduces Darwin's background in creating the theory, its main ideas, and its impact on later generations. All right, now I'll use 3 questions to interpret this book's main content for you. First, how is the theory of evolution proposed? Second, what are the main contents of Darwin's theory of evolution? Third, what profound impacts has Darwin's theory of evolution had on later generations? First, let's cover the initial question, how evolution theory was proposed. Before discussing this, let's learn about the scientist who proposed evolution, Charles Robert Darwin, born in 1809 in Shrewsbury, England. His father and grandfather were both famous doctors, especially his grandfather, Erasmus. Darwin was not only a doctor, but also a naturalist, and influenced by his family, he enrolled at the University of Edinburgh to study medicine. But unable to face seriously ill patients suffering, he dropped out of the University of Edinburgh and transferred to Cambridge University to study theology. Wanting to become a priest, however, by chance, he became a disciple of botany professor John Henslow. Under Henslow's influence, Darwin developed a strong interest in natural history. Also, on Henslow's recommendation, the 22-year-old Darwin was selected as a naturalist for the British royal ship Beagle's global survey voyage. And it was this voyage that changed Darwin's life trajectory. His life, for the next 50 years, was closely tied to evolution theory. The English name for Beagle is Beagle, also translated as little hunting dog. This global survey voyage lasted 5 years, from 1831 to 1836. During this time, Darwin faced threats from volcanic earthquakes and serious illnesses. However, compared to the hardships of the journey, Darwin gained more. He observed plants, animals, and rocks worldwide and collected many precious biological specimens. It was precisely what he saw and heard on this expedition that sparked Darwin's thoughts on where life on Earth came from. The idea of evolution gradually took root in his mind. After returning to London, Darwin had become a promising geologist. He wrote and published papers on the origin and distribution of coral reefs and the formation of the Andes Mountains, drawing attention from the scientific community. In 1839, he published The Voyage of the Beagle, detailing the Beagle's journey, which boosted his fame. At the same time, Darwin married his wife, Emma Wedgwood. 2 years after they married, their first child was born. However, after that voyage, Darwin's health declined, plagued by digestive diseases, forcing him to live in Down House in London's suburbs for his last decades, never traveling far again. But this gave Darwin ample time for thinking and writing, and he often interacted with geologists like Charles Lyell and botanists like Joseph Hooker, staying at the forefront of scientific research despite his illness. It was through discussions with these scientists that the initial ideas of evolution gradually formed and refined. Darwin's health was poor, and his children were sickly, unfortunately passing away one after another. Despite suffering both physically and mentally, he did not stop working. Finally, in late 1859, the book On the Origin of Species by Means of Natural Selection or the Preservation of Favored Races in the Struggle for Life was published. This book is what later became known as On the Origin of Species. Actually, the idea of species evolution wasn't first proposed by Darwin. Including his grandfather, many naturalists had already realized that species are constantly changing and evolving. However, due to constraints from religious thought, few scientists dared to explicitly propose this view. For instance, in Christianity, all things, including humans, were created by God and remain unchanged after creation. Under religious influence, many thought studying natural history and biology was just about understanding God's creation. But Darwin disagreed. In this regard, the most influential for him was French naturalist and geologist Jean-Baptiste Lamarck. In Lamarck's 1809 work, Philosophie zoologique, he articulated that species on Earth are constantly changing. He attributed this change to use and disuse. What does that mean? For example, giraffes have long necks because they stretched to reach high leaves, and this change was inherited by offspring. Thus, necks got longer. Darwin agreed species are changing but disagreed with Lamarck. And regarding the cause, extensive observation told Darwin it's not species changing actively, but the environment selecting the best adapted. This view is the familiar survival of the fittest, the core idea of Darwin's evolution theory. All right, we've covered the first question, how evolution was proposed. The Beagle voyage provided Darwin with research samples, while predecessors like Lamarck provided intellectual foundation. After over 20 years of preparation, On the Origin of Species was published, explicitly proposing evolution for the first time. So, what are the main contents of evolution theory? This is the second question we'll cover today. To understand evolution, we first need three basic concepts: species, adaptation, and evolution. Before Darwin, Swedish naturalist Carl Linnaeus had established his classification system. He classified all organisms into kingdoms, phyla, classes, orders, families, genera, and species, with species as the smallest indivisible unit. However, it's easy to see that organisms of the same species have distinct differences. For example, every human is different. Even twins have differences. In fact, no two organisms are exactly alike. In Darwin's view, species are just collections of similar organisms, subjectively divided by humans. They constantly change through generations, with no immutable species created by God as claimed by creationism. Now let's discuss adaptation. Creationists believe God always places species where they should be. For example, British philosopher William Whewell believed God placed snow lotuses exactly where they grow best. Meaning each species doesn't need to adapt. God already arranged everything. But Darwin emphasized adaptation. All living things must adapt to their environment to survive. Snow lotuses grow on snowy peaks because they adapted to frigid environments through long-term evolution. Similarly, dinosaurs went extinct precisely because they failed to adapt to sudden environmental changes. Finally, let's discuss evolution, the core concept also called biological change. This idea originated in ancient Greece, with its core being that everything in the world changes. And once these changes follow patterns, studying those patterns becomes possible. Darwin believed biological evolution also follows researchable patterns. In On the Origin of Species, Darwin's ideas about evolution are precisely based on these three concepts. Now let's explore evolution's core. How do species originate and evolve? As mentioned earlier, Lamarck already recognized species constantly change. He attributed this to use and disuse, but Darwin disagreed. Darwin believed change occurs through natural selection. So how does natural selection operate during evolution? Darwin cited Malthus population theory. When reproduction exceeds environmental capacity, some must perish. Those who perish are least adapted, while survivors are best adapted and continue evolving to maintain adaptation. For example, during ice ages, hardier species and individuals survived, passing those traits to offspring. Thus, environmental challenges repeatedly enact natural selection on organisms. Additionally, varying environments cause species to develop in different directions. During his global voyage, Darwin examined places like Hawaii, New Zealand, and Australia, isolated from continents with uniform environments and less competition. Species there evolved more slowly and uniformly compared to mainland counterparts facing diverse temperature and humidity conditions. Darwin also discovered significant trait variations in the same species across major rivers, deserts, and mountain ranges. For instance, marine life on either side of Central or South America differed drastically, rarely sharing fish, shellfish, or crab species, proving different environments create distinct species. Simultaneously, Darwin studied ancient organisms through extensive fossil research. Like the Archaeopteryx fossil discovered in Germany. Darwin saw Archaeopteryx as evidence of dinosaurs evolving into birds, developing feathers for warmth and wings for flight and hunting, enhancing environmental adaptability. Moreover, there's the Archaeopteryx fossil. Darwin also found older geological layers contained simpler fossils. Actually, Earth's overall evolution progressed from simple to complex organisms. Thus, we can trace species origins backward through evolutionary history. Today's complex life originated from single-cell organisms, with Earth's changing environments birthing biodiversity. So, how do species transmit traits across generations? Evolving complexity without interruption. Today we understand genetics, but DNA and genes remained undiscovered in Darwin's time. Yet, Darwin knew mechanisms must exist for both species stability and change to sustain life. All right, we've covered that. The third question, what's the core content of Darwin's evolution theory? Organisms evolve diversely in response to environments, advancing from simple to complex. Our biodiverse world originated from simple life with natural selection, survival of the fittest, driving evolution. As a revolutionary idea in biology, evolution has been controversial since its inception, especially facing fierce attacks from conservative religious groups. Yet, through constant questioning, evolution gradually became the foundation of modern biology and was applied across human society. Now, let's discuss the book's final question. What profound impacts has Darwin's theory of evolution had on later generations? When discussing evolution's spread, we must mention its loyal supporter, Thomas Huxley. Due to Darwin's poor health and introverted nature, he avoided public speeches, communicating mainly through letters, while Huxley became his vocal advocate, championing evolutionary ideas. After Darwin published On the Origin of Species in 1859, Huxley immediately recognized evolution's immense significance for biology. He marveled, such a brilliant idea. Why didn't I think of that? Drawing from evolutionary theory, Huxley wrote Man's Place in Nature, first proposing humans evolved from apes. But evolution soon faced fierce attacks from elites like Bishop Wilberforce and Richard Owen, who coined dinosaur, especially Wilberforce's 17,000-word critique, where Huxley publicly debated and triumphed. For evolution's spread, we must also mention scientist Alfred Russel Wallace, who independently developed similar ideas contemporaneously. Before Origin was published, he'd already written papers on evolutionary concepts. After publication, he didn't dispute priority. Instead, he firmly supported Darwin as evolution's primary architect. Wallace called himself a Darwinist, writing works like Darwinism to spread evolutionary ideas. In the 19th century, evolution remained theoretical, lacking molecular biology support for concepts like genetic variation and natural selection. By mid-20th century, Watson and Crick discovered DNA's double helix, revealing heredity's mechanisms and providing scientific evidence for evolution. Evolution finally became biology's foundational theory, embraced by most biologists. Some scholars, like sociologist Herbert Spencer, applied evolution to society, advocating survival of the fittest in human affairs, known as social Darwinism. Later, social Darwinism spawned so called scientific racism. Scientific racism claimed natural selection applies to humans. Superior races should eliminate weaker ones to claim living space. For example, Nazi racial policies during World War II stemmed from this ideology. Beyond racism, social Darwinism also birthed eugenics. In early 20th century America, some researchers argued mentally disabled, physically impaired, and inferior races should be sterilized to prevent passing bad genes. However, Huxley and others vigorously resisted such misapplications of evolution. He denounced these social theories as reasoned savagery. Today, many scientists work to refine and supplement evolutionary theory. For example, American scientist Stephen Jay Gould proposed punctuated equilibrium as an evolutionary supplement. This theory suggests evolution isn't constant but alternates between long stability and brief upheavals. Environmental disruptions may accelerate evolutionary change, yet debates about evolution's validity continue, with religious critics citing gaps in fossil evidence for species transitions. For instance, the human-chimpanzee common ancestor lacks fossil proof. Science remains ongoing. Evolution needs further confirmation through scientific advancement. All right, that concludes our interpretation of Darwin and evolution. Reading notes are below the audio. See you tomorrow.